draft PDF is in progress. Give it some time, be patient. Then, once the draft PDF, and if I want to view the draft PDF, I can come back up here. Oh, actually, I have to do this first. So if I want to view the draft PDF, I go in here, decision assessment approval notes, primary approver. The approver is also checking off, I have reviewed incident tactics and confirmed that they are consistent with my incident strategy. Ensure that all required elements have been checked before clicking save. That's that same list that I'm going back and forth and checking, so I know that everything is saved. I hit save. If I didn't want to hit save, I could return for edits right here. What that would do is push it back into, right now, none of the other editors can work on it, right? Because it's queued up. Nobody can work on it right now. If I wanted, like, say, Ben, you did a horrible job on that organizational assessment. Sure. I need you to rephrase that, you know. Yeah. I'm going to return that for edits. Ben goes back in, we go through that same process again. If everything is good, I like it, I'm going to say approve decision. If I want to preview the decision, I can preview the decision by clicking on that button, and it should bring up a PDF. So and downloads OneDrive, not desktop. I'm going to save it there. Open that folder. Okay. And this is what the published draft decision looks like. You'll notice there's draft all over the outside of it. That's because it's draft. It hasn't been published yet. We can scroll through decision rationale. This is what I put in there. Decision rationale goes front and center. Okay, so that's one of the better things about WFDSS is they've kind of reorganized how the document flows. Once it's published, the decision rationale used to be buried at the end of the document. Nobody knew where it was, really. I mean, unless you really knew WFDSS. Now it's front and foremost, right at the middle or right at the beginning. You can also attach maps. So if you want a map to be seen right at the beginning of the decision, attach it in your decision rationale, like I did here. As you scroll through, you can see here that the strategic summary, we can see here that we're going to do full suppression on 90% of the fire. We're going to do 10% point zone protection, which, you know, in this case, you know, where this fire is, probably more than likely what you guys would be doing. Strategic course of action, you know, we've got all that typed in here. Many of you may see your good work in here. Relative risk, you know, somebody put a lot of time, did a lot of good work on the relative risk there, copied a lot of good information in there. All of that is, again, color coded. Moderate is orange, red is high. Organizational needs, organizational assessment. Ben, you did a great job on that. Again, everything is listed in there. You can see here the color coding. Low is blue. I guess high is pink. Maybe that's a shade of red, you know. Again, all the moderate stuff is in orange. All the unit fire planning information. So all of this information is imported in from Spatial Fire Planning Service. So all the language and everything can be edited in Spatial Fire Planning Service by Kate at any time during the year. So if you're going through here and you see some stuff that's outdated, we can get that updated in Spatial Fire Planning Service. But obviously, you know, that clipped out a lot of desert tortoise information. You can see a lot of that information gets populated in the decision, right? So if we've done our job, and in Spatial Fire Planning Service, if we've drafted that language to be clear, succinct, operationally useful language, that language gets pulled into the WFDSS decision, and then that becomes the decision that IC3s are reading and everybody else. So when you're going through these decisions, if you see language in there that you don't like, it's just a matter of editing it in Spatial Fire Planning Service, right? But that's a decision right there. You can see very basic, right? No maps. Unless, I mean, the only map that's in there is the map that I added. So if you want to create a better decision, you obviously need a lot more maps, right? Whether they're weather, whether they're, you know, whether they're jurisdictional agency, all that stuff. I mean, the decision lives within WFDS, so people can log into WFDS and see the decision within WFDS, but the actual decision itself is this PDF. So if you want your WFDS decision, AKA the PDF version, to have maps, to have weather, other examples of good attachments that I've seen, leaders' intent documents that get uploaded into the WFDS decision, delegations of authority that get uploaded into the WFDS decision, right? All of that is part of that fire package that when you realize that this WFDS decision is part of the incident history file and a permanent record of the incident history file, how you include all that auxiliary information in this decision becomes much more important. Right. So be thinking about that. This WFDS decision is a permanent record. It does get included in all of the incident history files for accident attack fire. But again, it doesn't automatically bring in weather. It doesn't automatically bring in maps. If you want that stuff, you as an editor are going to have to include it using that screenshot advanced editor process that I just showed you. And it's easy, right? I mean, it's easy enough to go to the Weather Service and, copy and paste, a fire weather graphic for the day and put that into your decision. It's just formatting it and making it look good and making it flow as well. Takes maybe a little extra work, but that's the basics of, we basically just walk through creating, writing, and approving a WFDS decision in 4 hours. So I know it's fast. I know it's not the greatest product, but if this was, if you guys were in the middle of a fire bust and you had 15 fires going and you knew that 5 to 10 of them are going to be type 3 incidents, this would be a quality decision to at least get us going and where we need to go for the next 4 to 5 days. Right? Yeah. So questions?
I think it's a good refresher walking back through it. I mean, it's quick, like you said, but you get foggy, especially, decision last year. So it's good for us. We didn't have that decision. It usually takes myself a real fire for it to beat in my head a couple of times. So
right.
Now I can at least take this home and go back and we can refine our trainings.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and if there's more I can do, I mean, if you guys do something,
we'll have questions, it's different for us now that we're part of Wildland Fire Service. We have more support. We're used to operating around, like banging our head against the wall, figuring it out. So it's good to know, because I do have questions, and a lot of times you're all alone. Who do I ask or hesitant to ask? So I don't want to ask. Let's just
reach out.
We have the table.
Let's figure it out.
Reach out. Are there other questions? I mean,
just thinking about, we've been doing a lot of these up on UTTR. A lot of the information sensitive that we aren't able to put into this decision. Are we doing what we need to do to document that? It's kind of a gray area, especially with values, right?
Yeah.
So what do we do to?
I think you are. I think if you got a concern, I mean, maybe some more language in the decision rationale just about, what those, I mean, not specific. I mean, and I don't know what that looks like. You have a better idea of what that looks like, but just a paragraph in the decision rationale explaining what is the concern is and why you can't necessarily identify everything, but here's the collaboration that's happening, right? I think that's easy to accomplish in the decision rationale. Yeah. Because I mean, and a lot of your fires too, I mean, weird case, right? I mean, these NTT, they're just weird fires all the way around, but that's why we want that. I mean, and in the future, if they're part of WFDS, I see, since this authorities table came out, I mean, and I'd said it to the group last week. I mean, that authorities table made WFDS even more important, because now WFDS is that shared platform where we're all going to, and we're all documenting that decision. So now that we've got the bureaus and the fire service going there, operationally, let's get all of our IC3s going there too. And then what does that platform look like once we start? I mean, I know right now it's not operational, but you include FIMS in WFDS and you include Wildcat in WFDS, right there. You got in 209, right there, you got a platform where you can do everything you need to in fire management in one platform.
Bring in RMA tools.
Yeah. So, part of my preach is, in my time, I went to Australia back in 2020, and they had at least the state of Victoria had this system that was one website that for every fire you logged into. And if you can imagine a WFDS website that you log into, one tab is Wildcat, one tab is 209, one tab is WFDS, and one tab is AGOL. Everything, every fire got entered into that website, and every person that supported that fire, from dispatchers to ICs to fire planners, logged into that website, was able to find all the information they needed to in that website by switching between those 4 tabs.
Because we had it on the ground.
Yeah.
So we were using it.
Yeah. Beautiful
Walk
system.
around,
Beautiful system.
take a walk back.
And I guarantee that in every AAR that those folks did, I mean, and we did it because we were the last group to leave. We told the head group that was sitting, you know, there in Sydney coordinating everything from the Forest Service, Mike DeWitt at the time. He's an IC, or was an IC on the Southern Area Red Team. We told him, you know, you guys are capturing what we need to take back. We need to take this back. These guys have this dial. Australia has got this figured out. We need to take this back to America, because this is how we should be managing our fires. And unfortunately, 5 years later, and we're nowhere closer to having that single unified interoperable system. We have Irwin, right? We had to create this Irwin system that went out to all these other programs and pulled all the data in and then shared it with all the other systems. But we can't create fully interoperable systems. We have to have tertiary systems such as Irwin that bring all that data together and make it usable. So pipe dreams, but we're getting there slowly but surely. But hopefully this part was useful. Unless there's other questions, or unless there's anything you guys want to cover right now, we're going to break. We're going to come back at 1 o'clock, and then we're going to finish the afternoon session. Kate's going to walk us through spatial fire planning, and then I've got a little bit on ISAP and some other products that we've put together to help support, whether it's briefing teams or going through the ISAP process that we're going to talk about. And then after that, we're basically done. So if you have questions, either ask them now or bring them back after lunch. We did complete all of the WFDSS stuff this morning. So again, just as a review, we learned about WFDSS, we logged into WFDSS, we set up our profile in WFDSS, and then we actually worked through. And if I pull up right here, this was actually the culmination of what we did this morning. We created, approved, and published a draft decision in WFDSS for our training fire. And again, the decision rationale is moved now. It's right front and center in the actual PDF document. So it's the very first thing they read. Then you go into the strategic summary, and then you go into the PMS 236 portion, relative risk, organizational needs, and the rest of the decision is all right here. So the reason I wanted to bring this up and talk to this is because in the decision within this tab, which is the unit fire planning information, all of this fire planning information that gets pulled into the WFDSS decision initially starts as information in the Spatial Fire Planning Service. So I talked about the Spatial Fire Planning Service being separate from WFDSS. It is separate from WFDSS, but they're also related to each other. And WFDSS reads from the Spatial Fire Planning Service, and all of the data that goes into WFDSS is entered into the Spatial Fire Planning Service by fire planners that are called data managers. And you guys are lucky enough to have Kate as your fire planner here in the state of Nevada. And she does a very good job with the Spatial Fire Planning Service. And kind of just to change things up and keep me from having to talk all day, I was going to ask Kate to spend a few minutes. I can either drive for you, you can come up here, do whatever you want to do, and just kind of spend some time talking about the data that we actually have in Spatial Fire Planning Service, because it's even more important now that we go through the transition, right? I brought up that authorities document earlier where it said that, you know, going forward in this transition, the Wildland Fire Service, we will continue to be responsible for loading data into the Spatial Fire Planning Service and uploading that data and so forth. But we're going to rely on our bureaus to give us that data and give us that information that needs to go with that data and make it useful for FMPs and WFDSS decisions as well. So this is our opportunity also in the red book, and it covers WFDS refreshers topics. It talks about annually covering spatial fire planning data and what is included in your spatial fire planning data, and also getting feedback on, anything that, maybe we can change in the future. So within the spatial fire planning service, and we'll spend some more time talking about that, there's basically three primary feature types that you're going to look at. There's the unit boundary, there's the subunit non-overlapping shapes, and there's the subunit overlapping shapes. I'm just going to talk to the unit boundary to start with, and then I'm going to let Kate talk to the non-overlapping strategic and the overlapping strategic. The unit boundary is important because all of the information that is in Spatial Fire Planning Service was originally in WFDS Classic. So if you remember WFDS Classic, maybe not all of you remember, maybe only I remember this, but in 2015, WFDS Classic opened up the ability to do spatial fire planning. And we went from the ability to do FMU-based planning, which was fire management units, which are large polygons. We went from being able to do FMU planning to spatial planning in WFDS in 2015. All of that data and everything that lived in WFDS Classic was imported into the Spatial Fire Planning Service when WFDS Next Generation was created and WFDS Classic was closing shop, right? So all of the information that we have in Spatial Fire Planning Service was imported from WFDS Classic. And the reason why that's important is in WFDS Classic, we actually had what were called unit-wide shapes. And the unit boundary contains any of the old unit-wide shapes that you had in WFDS Classic that may have provided some direction. And for example, in this case, for Southern Nevada, if you scroll through there, you can see the district boundaries, but you can actually see here there's some direction, right? For like example here, except for initial attack, off-district engines, crew carriers, overhead vehicles, and helitank helicopter support vehicles will, upon check-in and before proceeding to the line, wash down at the Logandale, Red Rock, Pahrump fire stations, or there's more in there, right? So that kind of language, that is specific to your FMP. That was pulled out of your resource management plan. That is in the Spatial Fire Planning Service. But again, this is direction that falls in the unit boundary shape because it doesn't fit. It was included as overall unit boundary direction or unit direction in WFDS Classic. So it's important that you realize this language does get pulled into your decision, right? And then if there's anything out of date or anything that needs to be edited in this language, it's as easy as a data manager going into Spatial Fire Planning Service, editing the text, and then moving on. You can do it in real time, basically. Where in WFDS Classic, this process, we had to go through the NOC. We had to get a GIS person from the NOC to approve the GIS shape approval, and then we could apply text to it. So it's streamlined what we do. But at the same time, it's made it so there's maybe a little bit more of a process that we need to make sure that people are aware of, that they know what kind of data they have. So obviously for Southern Nevada, this is a unit boundary. I'm going to go back to the filter menu and under feature service type here. And instead of looking at the unit boundary, we are going to look at the non-overlapping shape. And this is where we start to narrow our shapes down, right? So in Strategic Fire Planning Service, these are the shapes that for Southern Nevada anyway, we have them listed as Air Force suppression, BLM suppression due to desert tortoise habitat, our Bureau of Reclamation full suppression due to desert tortoise habitat. So there's a little bit of uniqueness with the naming conventions, that we go from district to district. We've been, I'm not going to bring up the map, but we've been working to try to standardize our language as much as possible. And really, I don't know where that is right now. I mean, we're kind of on hold with that process because we're waiting on the clarification to come from the National Fire Board memo that came out in February saying that we only have the direct extinguishment and the indirect containment options. And then next step after that is if those are the only approved fire management options, then we have to get those options changed and edited in both the 209 system and in the WFDS system. But these are what you guys have listed as subunit non-overlapping shapes. And typically the reason why they are subunit non-overlapping shapes is because the fire management for that shape falls into either one of two categories. It's either a full suppression, where we put the fire out, smallest possible size, minimal possible impacts, or we classify it into what we used to call other than full suppression, right? And in that other than full suppression bin, that's where you have options such as monitor. That's where you have point and zone protection. That's where you have all of those options that are not putting people out in front of a fire, making sure that there's a cold fire line before you call the fire contained, controlled, and out, right? There's a lot of other management options that we used to have in how we managed fire that we need to be able to address in these options as well. Going back to your subunit non-overlapping shapes, each of these is a response type. And this is why I wanted you guys to kind of spend some time, and not so much for me, but for everybody in the room too, having Kate, Tyler, Ben kind of talk through what each of these different management options means and what that means to you guys in fire management. So Kate, at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you and you can start talking.
Okay. I've got it pulled up on my computer, so I'll just go ahead and hit the USAF suppression and desert tortoise. And Ben, Tyler, anyone else, please chime in, because this is still very new to me for Southern Nevada. But this talks about, so Dylan, correct me, but it seems like I was associated like the strategic objectives with things usually.
Yep.
And then, okay, cool.
Yep.
So these are like the strategic objectives. And when we do the WFDSS, there's under strategic assessment is where you can pull all this stuff in, correct? Yeah.
Yep, there's a drop-down menu in there that you can tell it, you have to tell it that you first want the subunit non-overlapping shapes. And then once you tell it that you want your subunit non-overlapping shape, you should be able to pull any one of these out of it.
Right, so this one in particular, for Southern Nevada, a lot of our main species of concern, I guess you could say, as opposed to greater sage grouse, is desert tortoise for here. So this one is just talking about things to keep in mind, objectives. Let's see here. Provide fire management following guidelines in the National Fire Plan. Provide fire suppression efforts commensurate with resource and adjacent property values at risk. I'm just gonna go through this quickly. Provide maximum fire protection through a comprehensive fire detection system using a multi-agency approach. Use the BLM approved fire suppression techniques in areas of concern for habitat, cultural resources, threatened and endangered species, the designated ACEC and rural wildland interface zones, manage noxious weeds and invasive species, implement control activities within the constraints of the existing budget. Let's see, it also talks about ensure desert tortoise habitat conditions are consistent with the direction identified in the vegetation objectives and management directions. And it looks like these are page numbers directing back to the FMP. Is that correct?
Would be, yeah, it'd be the NRFM would be so on their side. So that's the interesting. So that's the interesting thing is they've got their resource management plan and then it's overlapping with Southern Nevada's resource management plan.
Right.
So through Brumfield office. So it's pulling in both of those objectives.
Right. Sounds great.
Anything more you guys want to say about that one in particular? Otherwise, I'll move along. And then the next one, Dylan, if you want to go to that one, I was trying to click on that one earlier.
The BLM suppression.
Yeah, wasn't sure. That must be a layer for the whole state.
No, that's Southern Nevada.
Okay.
That's why it's got that US NVSND.
Look like the monuments, Tyler, is what I'm seeing there.
Yeah.
The equal me.
Areas consist of desert tortoise, critical habitat or low elevation RRCNCA vegetation communities.
Red rocks.
There should be one for stone, red rock.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's the NCAs and the special stuff. Yeah.
So this is one that looks like we need text added to it, right? That's what you're seeing too? Yeah.
Yep.
So this is one where Kate would want to go through and just whatever text needs to be associated with that, similar to what we saw in the Air Force one. I mean, if there's specific bullet items, wherever you guys pull that out of, this is where we regurgitate that basically from your FMP, right? We copy that from your FMP and put that into Spatial Fire Planning Service. And of course, your FMP pulls it out of whatever your land or resource management plan is.
We have a spreadsheet that has all that and some of these, check it out, there's, there's been pulled out.
Yeah.
Got it here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so I definitely recommend updating that. Let me get back to the filter there.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to the next one.
This BLM.
Yeah.
And see, and this is just, I mean, what is the difference between SUPP and SUPE?
Research manager.
Okay,
That's hard.
and that makes obviously that makes perfect sense to you guys. In the language, I mean, maybe come up with just a little bit of description or key, for whether it's page numbers or whatever else. That way, the next person who gets into Spatial Fire Planning Service knows exactly how that's set up too. So that's a question I've always wanted to ask, is what's the difference between P and E? That's good enough. I mean, obviously different plans, right? And Kate, is there something you want to talk to on this one?
This one, I was just gonna say, I wanna go in and edit the language here, the way looks like it was copied and pasted, but then not really. Like it-
Probably.
Yeah,
Formatting.
yeah, there's some formatting.
Depends if they got it from Word or from PDF.
Yeah.
Most of the FMPs are spatially hosted.
I think most of it came out of that spreadsheet, it's probably just the way,
Yeah.
we did a good job of consolidating on that, so grab it. But
and I've got all the archive stuff is still there too.
With Spatial Fire Planning Service, it's all driven off of HTML text too, right? So Kate, when you get to editing it, there's a website called HTML Cleaner. You can just Google it, pull it right up. That is what you'll want to use, because with HTML Cleaner, what you can do is you can go through, you can format everything, make it look pretty, you can boldface it, put bullets, do everything like that. And then what HTML Cleaner does is it spits out just the HTML reference that you would turn around, paste that into Spatial Fire Planning Service. And then when WFDSS reads your text, it comes across clean bullets, clean bold, all of that. So yeah, when you get around to that, if you need me to show you that, I can. But
Okay.
definitely HTML Cleaner is your best friend when it comes to editing text in the Spatial Fire Planning. And that goes for any of these AGOL products too. That's not just Spatial Fire. Any of these AGOL products that require a lot of intensive text, use HTML Cleaner on it, because that's what gives you good, clean information and bring it back in.
Yeah, that was definitely something I spent a lot of time for Elkos. When we edited our language,
Mhm.
it was, yeah. Transferring from like a Word document.
Right.
Gotta get it right. Ben, Tyler, do you want to say anything about this particular one? It's a little hard for me to read.
just the Mojave guidelines, that's what it's applying to, a lot of that lesson learned from 2005. Yeah. Everyone's laughing.
Tyler and I were driving around in a Tatra, wishing we could go direct on these fires, and we had to put a hose lay around because desert tortoise habitat.
Is this one incorporated the ACECs also?
I think the red rock,
Yeah,
it should be,
I think
It would encompass desert tortoise habitat and corridors, which ACE sees most of them designated are for the purpose of protecting desert tortoise habitat.
Then, I thought, yeah, we got it in there, I just don't remember if it was this, in this one for sure, but yeah.
Yeah,
Capture them all.
in the edge, don't you click on the EP, didn't it have some of those in there as well?
This is the one that needs text. We don't have any text in this one, so.
The PP does also have the ACDCs from the look of it.
Yes, yeah.
And if that may be the case, is it because this management direction would be the exact same as the management direction, or
Not,
is it different?
not quite. It's-
Okay.
It would be a different
Okay,
management plan
Understood.
associated with each of those
Yep.
conservation units.
okay.
Yeah.
Copy that.
Oh, 5.
It's muddy down here, though, lots of different plans,
Oh, yeah, no. That's,
and you bring in USB.
that's the complexity.
Yeah.
That's your complexity. All right, so how about this USBR, Kate?
Yeah, so this USBR, it looks like it's probably related to Bureau of Reclamation, their FMP. And they have, let's see, these are the management considerations, washes, roads, and other natural features will be utilized when possible for fire lines. Burnout operations will be conducted at burn the least acreage possible and only what is necessary to establish a safe containment control line. Unburned islands will not be intentionally burned unless they pose a risk to control. So that's language specific to their,
LCR, MSCP.
A resource management plan,
Yeah.
essentially, yeah.
Multi-species habitat conservation program.
That one, thank you.
Another thing I noticed here, we have, I was gonna ask you, Dylan, this. I remember in the old WFDS, you could see which ones were turned on and then which ones were turned off, you would not be able to see. So it looks like these are all the ones that are turned on still, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay,
yes. If they're in Spatial Fire Planning Service, they're active.
yeah. I know one thing I did for Elko, and this may not be, it's just may be different here, but one thing we did was we just had it so there was one block of text with all the information that we needed associated with each, layer. That's something we could always think about.
The important thing for me, so operationally, obviously, this tells your ICs what they can and can't do. So when you publish your WFDS decision, whatever language is in here automatically gets populated in that WFDS decision, as long as it's included in that planning area boundary, right? But secondarily, a benefit of having your entire district broken out into each of these subunits is also, it's a way for duty officers to potentially prioritize multiple starts, right? So at least, maybe in this convention, it's a little differently, but in some of the other conventions where you have full suppression due to species, full suppression not due to species, and then other than full suppression, right? Those three delineations can really help prioritize multiple starts across a large expanse, right? Obviously, like for up north, our highest priority would be suppression of fires in greater sage-grouse habitat, followed by full suppression of fires outside of greater sage-grouse habitat, followed by other than full suppression. So immediately when you have this type of spatial fire planning delineation, you can not only do it to, help push information operationally down to your incident commanders, but you can also use it as a way between duty officers, FMOs, that they can help to at least initially prioritize fires, right? I mean, it may not be a perfectly accurate list of what is number 1 through number 10, but if you can say, hey, fires in this zone are my priority, followed by this zone, followed by that zone, followed by that zone, it kind of helps break out some delineation, right? When you have multiple starts as well. But so these are the subunit non-overlappings. And then you also have subunit, so the subunit non-overlappings, obviously they're subunit, right? Because they all have to fit within that unit boundary. And in this case, they're non-overlapping because within each of those polygons, you only have one type of map. I mean, you're going to go in full suppression or, whatever those options are. In the or in the overlapping shapes, you can have, that query. So here, for example, is where you can put, whether it's wildlife habitat, whether it's NTTR, Gold Butte National Monument, you have wilderness boundaries in here, you have riparian areas. This is another spot where if you just, I mean, if it's not necessarily specific fire management direction for a specific polygon, if it's just things, considerations that you want to be made, this is where you can list those as well. So again, these are the subunit overlapping shapes. You load these into Spatial Fire Planning Service just like you do the non-overlapping, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility to where maybe this isn't something that needs to be in one of those subunit non-overlapping shapes. Maybe this is something that we can include in here, so you include it here. So you guys got 9 distinct shapes in there as well that look like, you know, you got special management areas, ACECs, LCR full suppression, riparian areas, wilderness, Gold Butte, NTTR, Thule Springs, and full suppression. What is this? Las Vegas Field Office full suppression, Desert Tortoise. So yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's where your text, would that be the text that should have went to the other one? That one right there?
Is that a CPP? Full SUPP?
I don't know, that just says PFO full sup,
Suppression.
Oh, full soup,
full soup,
SUPE.
SUPP.
You scroll down, probably more in there, right, Don?
Yeah, yeah, it's, and this is,
There's more at the bottom. Different.
Originally, there was 16.
Okay.
so anyway, just considerations, right? I mean, and how you organize your Spatial Fire Planning Service data. There's different ways that can be organized. This is really easy to do. We can, you know, Kate, I believe, has the data manager, right? Do you have the shape editor role too, or just data manager?
I think I've got like some sort of expanded.
Yeah, you got the data manager, so that means Kate can update any of the text information and any of the actual GIS work that needs to be done. I think you can do that, but I think you may need to go to Levitt. I think he's the shape editor for all of our actual GIS data.
Yeah, yeah. And I have not uploaded anything yet to the new Spatial Fire Planning Service. So I think I remember that's,
Okay.
it's a little different.
Is that where the fuel treatments go?
No, fuels treatments are all going into IFPERS. Right?
Yeah, because I was looking the other day and I didn't see our recent aerial herbicides aren't in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't trust any of the fuels treatment layers in
They all,
with this.
yeah, it had just the old ones like
Yeah.
2012.
So is there any other layers you guys can think of that may be beneficial to have?
Do you have to go back and reset, like if you want to see like the park, where like the park borders Gold Butte? Like how would you see the park layer and Gold Butte at the same time for like multi-jurisdictional fires?
I would have to go back in and pull just the parks,
Just the
spatial
park.
fire planning data.
So you'd have to do it, start all over then.
Well, the park.
But like on the results thing, you'd have to go back, pick
Yeah, we can do
the
it.
MPS and
I
then
mean, we can do it right now.
you couldn't have both of them up at the same time.
No, you can only have one agency at a time.
And is that the same for states? Like you can't have multiple states up at the same time? Like for like a York fire kind of thing?
Well, this is just spatial fire planning service.
Yeah.
This is just the dashboard to enter your information in the spatial fire.
So you have
That's
to
all
go
this is for.
to each individual.
This isn't made for anything more than just units being able to edit their shape and edit their text that goes in the spatial fire plan. It's not meant to be a situational assessment tool. This is just made to get your GIS and your text
I
information.
was just thinking like if I could pull everything up for that area, then I could go through on the bottom, but I have to go back and forth.
Right, and that's because you're only, I mean, the way it's set up is like, for example, here, so
Yeah, but.
subunit non-overlapping for the park, for Lake Mead, looks like you guys got interface and Shivwitz Plateau. That makes sense to what you guys plan on? Okay. So that means like if we were to go in here, we would have specific information just for the interface. And then if we had a polygon that intersected the Shivwitz Plateau, there'd be specific direction in here just for the Shivwitz Plateau. And that's how you'd set it up. I mean, And you can set up spatial fire planning service to whatever makes the most sense to you, but it needs to follow that. The unit boundary is the primary boundary. The sub-unit boundaries don't overlap the unit boundary. But then, for example, in your guys' case, right, you guys have Bureau of Rec, where, and I've been kicking this back and forth in my brain for 2 years now, and I still haven't figured out. I mean, I'm just letting you guys go with whatever works for you, but in the future, maybe Bureau of Rec has their own unit boundary, right? And then they have, I mean, we provide it for them, but that doesn't fall under the Southern Nevada unit boundary. It falls under the Bureau of Rec unit boundary that falls under their own spatial fire planning data. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but if it works for you, keep going with it. And that's the important thing right now, is if it's been working for you, don't change it now. But I do see that in the future, we maybe need to realign our jurisdictional boundaries a little bit more with what we're calling our subunit non-overlap. And in this case, you guys obviously have a specific agreement with Bureau of Rec that gives you guys protecting agency status. So it makes sense. But if you didn't have that agreement and you were just doing fire planning for the Bureau of Rec, might make for some different considerations.
And now the Wildland Fire Service determined that they're going to provide coverage from anyway, so.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
They just need to figure out what's actually theirs and it's something.
Yeah.
those are the hard things there. That's why there's no boundaries.
There's a couple other things in here. So on this page here, maybe I should start with that. And I know this is kind of hard, but this is kind of a good diagram just to show. I mean, these are basically the bins of spatial fire planning service, multi-unit, unit level non-overlapping, subunit non-overlapping, and subunit overlapping shapes. The other unit shapes that are in here, so in this case, let's say polygons, and let's say, Kate, do you guys have other unit shapes for Southern Nevada?
Actually, I'm not, hold on, I thought I was sharing that, no, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, okay, so you got 27 of them, you got a lot of them. All right, so the other unit shapes, again, this is a carryover from WFDSS Classic. Other unit shapes in WFDSS Classic gave fire planners the ability to put lines, shapes, and polygons anywhere on the map, and you could associate any text with it. So you could put AML, you could put abandoned minelands, you could put, anything and everything that you could draw a polygon around of and associate text to, you could put in the air. Looks like in this case, guzzlers, AML, FUD, MTTR, there's a lot of different delineations here. And as far as the text that's associated with it, that's the one thing that in Spatial Fire Planning Service, we're still pretty limited on. So you can go in here and you can check out, see what it says. There's not a lot of information that goes in the comments. A lot of times you have to go back into the attribute table to figure out what it is. In this case, there's a label that goes with it, sensitive plants, so you know that those are sensitive plants. But again, this is other unit shapes in WFDSS. This is a kind of a catch-all for anything and everything. So critical values at risk, I would definitely consider, that's where I have always, historically, I've always used the other unit shapes to put all my values at risk in, whether they're greater sage grouse, whether they're desert tortoise, whether they're spotted desert dace, whatever the endangered species is, you can put it into the other unit shapes, and you can associate text with it, which makes it very handy. And then the interfaces that these do get pulled into WFDSS as well. So there isn't as much room to edit the text in Spatial Fire Planning Service, but there is still room to edit the text. Earlier, I was talking about the CVAR, or the Critical Value at Risk National Feature Service that they're starting to push now too. Eventually, that's probably going to take over as the authoritative data source from Spatial Fire Planning Service for these critical values. So anything that you currently have in other unit shapes, we may have to transition those over into those critical values at risk layer eventually, if that's kind of nationally the direction that we get. But until then, you can use this other unit shapes, and that's as a catch-all. So anything and everything. I mean, if there's stuff that you want to have in your WFDSS decisions that isn't addressed by your FMP, you can include it in other unit shapes. You know, for example, several years back after we did the initial sage-grouse effort, NDOW created a layer. You know, they said, hey, your guys' sage-grouse habitat data is way too complex. We want to give you a layer of just what's our first priority, our second priority, and what's our third priority. We put that into, you know, we put that into the other unit shapes, and it helps. It's an additional layer. You know, it's not, doesn't drive our decision support, but it helps inform our decision support. So when our agency administrators are sitting in, they can say, well, what's that NDOW priority 1, NDOW priority 2, and NDOW priority 3 layer? Those are NDOW's priorities to us of what they want us to protect, you know. So we can pull that data in. We can do that for NV energy. We can do that for power lines. We can do that for right-of-ways. We can do that for anything that needs special management consideration through your FMP or through your WFDSS decision. That makes sense. So yeah, you guys, and those are just the polygons, right? So yeah, I wonder. Let's see how many points you got. Usually we, well, not southern area. Don't pick southern area. Don't. Yeah, you only got 2. So you got, you know, radio repeater sites and well locations. So I mean, yeah, you know, it's always kind of fun for me to go through other units, other unit shape and see what they got. Because a lot of times they don't collect, oh, we have that, that's in there. Yeah. So yeah, look in there and, you know, maybe it's out of date, maybe it needs updated, but knowing that it's in there, you know, that's a lot of times just getting the information into WFDSS is the first step. So great. Any other points, Kate, you want to make on spatial fire planning service?
No, I think the biggest thing for me was just realizing how, with the new WFDSS and spatial fire planning service, how, you pull in the strategic objectives and the management requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So the other part, if I go back into view data, I go back. So you'll notice here, if I select, go through that same menu, but I select Nevada State Office, then it opens up a multi-unit shape. And the only reason Nevada State Office, any unit can get a multi-unit shape, you just have to get it approved. But one of the things that we've done for, at least for the greater sage-grouse habitat, which has changed recently too, is we have a statewide layer that incorporates all of the greater sage-grouse habitat into one statewide layer that pushes all of that management direction down through that feature service as well, so that at the district layer, you guys, districts can either reference that if they want, but they don't have to necessarily duplicate all that same text, right? Because that's in as a multi-unit shape. And in this case, I'm going to show this one because that includes, if I remember right, you guys now have, don't you guys have sage-grouse habitat on Southern Nevada District now?
I know on ATTR we do.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys are a sage-grouse district now. I don't have to say, you know, everybody but the non-granger sage-grouse. So yeah, you guys are a sage-grouse district now. But yeah, and you guys can see here, so this is the language. I mean, and this is a bad way to view it because I have to scroll through here. There'd be a much better way to view it, but you can see that all of the sage-grouse direction from the updated greater sage-grouse EIS is in spatial fire planning service. So if, even though your FMPs, you know, FMPs still may not have been updated to reference that, your latest WFDSS decision is still going to include the latest direction because we can put that direction into spatial fire planning service. And that makes it real easy for us to do updates, not only in spatial fire planning service, but it also filters down into WFDSS as well, because this is where WFDSS pulls all the information from. So I did want to make that a point. We are looking to do an additional multi-unit shape, probably looking at NV or at least power line right-of-ways. We haven't been able to get the information. NV Energy is very tight with their data. Everything you have to do goes through a solicitor. But we do have digitized right-of-way permits that Steve has created a layer from that we can upload into the Spatial Fire Planning Service as a multi-unit shape. May not jive exactly with the infrastructure layer that's in WFDS, because there is a power line infrastructure layer in WFDS that you can click on and view to. But at least this way, through that MOU that we're developing with NV Energy, we can say that if your fire is going to impact one of these areas, that's that initial trigger to start making those notifications to those NV Energy guys. And whatever else comes out through that MOU, that's whatever I'm told to put in there, I'll put in there. I'm just spitballing at this point. So, any other thoughts on that? Kate, you got any other spatial fire planning stuff you want to cover?
The solar stuff's probably going as well. I haven't gotten all those polygons now. And then I think it'd be the same.
For the state or for Southern Nevada? Just
Yeah, for the unique shape.
yeah, that'd definitely be one we want to add in there.
We have them in field maps. We haven't even looked this, but
In the old one, it has energy site right away is an old option. Don't know if that was.
I think that was part of it. I don't think that's actually the whole layer though.
Yeah, probably outdated in a way, but that was in the archives. There was someone that was there.
Right.
Probably updated.
Yeah, anything else that we can think
We've
about?
got a lot of new stuff. I'm not sure if you dug into some of the stuff on our energy and infrastructure layer, that's restricted, and it's just through, our easements, I guess, through like the end, like, what, the NVN, what are the easements? Like, I forget what they're called right now.
Right away.
Right of ways, yeah, yep, sorry, right of ways. So
We permit them a right away.
and that's kind of what we just, it's out of like an assumption that who it is it's gonna be a power line
Right.
or a fiber optic.
Yeah, but if you guys have solar sites, I mean, I know there's additional wind sites, they have. So if there's additional fire management considerations that are included in any, doesn't have to be in the NEPA for those projects, obviously, but if there's specific things that you guys want to see.
I mean, just a value in the decision and then a hazard, be associated with that as well. So
Right.
go both sides, yeah.
Right. Yep. No, that's a good point. Okay, so yeah, if there's nothing else from Spatial Fire Planning Service, and again, every agency has their own data in here right now. So park, you may want to go through and look at the park data and make sure there's nothing else. Forest Service, you guys have your own data in there as well. I've really been pushing. I'm hoping that Department of Defense eventually, they'll include all of their data in Spatial Fire Planning Service. We're working with Fallon, they're doing an updated FMP for Fallon NAS, and we're telling them that, hey, if you can just get all that data into Spatial Fire Planning Service, that's all we need. We don't need to see your FMP. If you can just put it in Spatial Fire Planning Service, draw us a polygon and tell us what that management action is, that's all we need to know, right? So that's why it's important and in my mind too, and this is something that I've been thinking about for at least the last 2 years, on the BLM side, on the Wildland Fire Service side, we could do away with our FMPs entirely right now and go to just Spatial Fire Planning Service direction. And we could do it with an IM that says every single Wildland Fire Service will have all of their bureau information uploaded in the Spatial Fire Planning Service. You'll have unit-wide fire information updated through the unit-wide data, and you'll have subunit non-overlapping, specific fire management direction for each of those polygons as well. That would do away with our need to do FMPs entirely, and everything would be spatially driven in the Spatial Fire Planning Service, and we would accomplish the exact same thing. So I hope that somebody asks my opinion for what an FMP needs to look like in 2 years, and I'm going to tell them Spatial Fire Planning Service is all we need. We don't need anything but. Forest Service has been using Spatial Fire Planning Service as their FMPs for at least 5 years now. And that's why, is because the FMPs are just an outdated document that is a text-based document that is really just a document that we use because of the legacy of it. So, but yeah, everything could definitely be in this FMP. So, okay, so that brings us to the last portion of the training, and the last thing we're going to talk about is ISAP and WFDS next generation integration. So I did want to spend a few minutes talking about ISAP, and again, I'm going to go back to the guide that we talked about, because in this guide, you know, we kind of dropped off after we did the decision rationale. One of the things that we didn't talk about before I break the class up is there's also a periodic assessment after the decision is approved, and this is going to be something that we need to get worked out sooner rather than later, because the periodic assessment in WFDS is no longer a standalone. It's actually a decision rationale. So if you notice how the decisions are set up now, if you go in and publish a decision like we did this morning, I said on there that in one day, I'm going to come back in as the approver and do a periodic assessment and state that that decision is still valid. You know, nothing's changed with the fire. The management actions are the same. Everything, the valid course of action, everything's still the same. But the periodic assessment needs to be done on whatever cycle the approving official says. So if they approve the decision and they say that it's going to be done in one day, they need to get back into the decision and do it within one day. If they say that it's going to be 7 days, they need to get back into that decision and do it within 7 days. You can set it out to 14 days. So as an agency administrator, if you're on a long-term fire and it's 99% contained and there is nothing changing with that fire from day to day, you don't have to do a periodic assessment every day. You can set that periodic assessment length to be every 14 days and do one every 14 days. So just keep that in mind. But it is important that the periodic assessment gets done. But like to do the decision that we did today, all the periodic assessment is going to be is you're going to log back into that decision rationale. In the decision rationale, you're going to type in a sentence that's a periodic assessment. You're going to reapprove the decision and republish it, and that is your periodic assessment. So within the periodic assessment, there's a lot of things that you could include. I've got some language in here that talks about what a good periodic assessment would look like. And in a lot of cases, yeah, it is just a regurgitation of what's in the 209. It's a regurgitation of what's been in every press release that's been put out since day one of the fire, but it still needs to be done. I mean, this is the agency administrator's way to document that they went in to their decision, validated that it's still current, that the situational assessment is still the same, and everything is still valid, right? That's their thumbs up. So this is one example of something you could cut and paste into a decision. There's also some other decision rationales in here. For example, the Forest Service uses 10 questions, right? They don't, I mean, Forest Service also, they used to have a policy where within the decision rationale, you had to list each of these questions. It's not so much that now. Now it's just each of these 10 questions has to be addressed or answered somewhere within that WFDS decision. But if I'm working with the Forest Service, I still advise them to put this right front for, you know, in the decision rationale. So somebody doesn't have to go through the entire WFDS decision to try to find all the answers to these 10 questions, right? If you've got 10 questions, go ahead and put those 10 questions in there, put the answers in there. That's a Forest Service thing, but most of our fires are interagency as well, multi-jurisdictional, so we're going to help them when it comes to that as well. The talking points that I included in this document are from last year, but they haven't changed. I mean, the talking points that were put out last year is still the same. The primary thing, though, specifically when we're talking ISAP, is WFDS is still the decision record. So whatever happens in ISAP, it needs to be included in the WFDS decision in order to actually be made part of the permanent record. If a fire is being managed long-term by a complex incident management team, the documentation that they produce through ISAP is part of the long-term record, part of the PMS 277 or the electronic file for that incident that goes with it. But if you, Southern Nevada District, are managing a type 3 fire, most of the times that documentation doesn't get uploaded. So WFDS is the documentation system of record for anything that you do for ISAP. And anything that gets done in ISAP, specifically if you're working with a team, I would ask the team to make sure that that gets included in the next WFDS decision. And then through either the SOPL or somebody else, they're going to have somebody that just works to get the ISAP documentation included in the WFDS decision. ISAP, we do have policy for ISAP now. Again, it's in the red book, where anytime there's a complex incident management team on a fire, Bureau agency administrators will complete strategic planning. So it doesn't say that incident strategic alignment process has to be the one ISAP process that's chosen, but the ISAP process that we've identified through the incident strategic alignment process is probably the best process to use if you want to make sure that all your bases are touched. And the reason why I talk about that is, and we can go through, you can talk about the story map, but basically you can look at the logo or you can look at the diagram. The ISAP is basically broken into 4 pillars. The first pillar of ISAP is identification of critical values at risk, right? So that's up to us. I mean, we can do that through our WFDSS decision. We can either do it with a broad-based stroke, just by saying that we want you to protect identified values at risk, or if you actually have the data to provide point data for each of those values at risk, you can put that within your decision and then identify what those values are. And you can also identify what the priority for the protection of those values are as well through a few different ways. The strategy section of ISAP, that kind of comes in after the team comes in, right? So if we have taken the time in pillar 1 to identify what are our critical values at risk and what are our priorities for protection, then when the team comes in, they take a look at that information through the WFDSS, through the end briefing, and they start developing their operational plan. And they start to develop what their strategy is going to be. Once they develop that strategy, pillar 3 is they evaluate what that strategy does to respond to risk. So if we decide to do strategic action A, what additional risks are we placing our responders under? If we decide to do strategic action B, what additional risk are we placing our responders under? And they work through that process with safety officers, with operations chiefs, with ICs, with everybody that's involved in that ISAP process, and they identify what are those strategic options and what are you trading off, right? If you're going to protect this value, what is the risk that you're passing on to responders? And then your safety officers identifying what mitigation measures are put in place to either mitigate the risk, or if you can't mitigate the risk down to an acceptable level, what other factors or what other control functions are being put into place in order to make that a safe work environment. And then ISAP pillar 4 is probability of success. Once you've gone through that whole process, you've identified what those strategic options are, you've identified what your values are, you've identified option A, B, or C based off of risk. You decide what strategic option are you going to employ, and then you have that discussion around clearly defining what success is and what likely strategies will be successful. There's actually a formula that if you work through the ISAP process and you work through the spreadsheet that is part of the ISAP process, it'll calculate what your probability of success is based off of just some basic underlying risk analysis factors like SDI and a few other things we've been talking about. Do you need to get to that point? Maybe, maybe not, maybe you're in an incident where you don't need to necessarily know that you have an 85% probability of success, but you can just rank it out by low, moderate, or high. That's another part of the ISAP process that you can use local SME experience to say, how realistic is it? Do we have a high probability? Do we have a low probability? Do we have a moderate probability of achieving this? And you can decide that as well. But that's basically what that ISAP process is identifying your values at risk, identifying what the strategic options are, identifying what the safety trade-offs are for protecting those values at risk, and then deciding what is the option that we are going to go forward with and implement, and then reevaluating that 2 days down the road, 4 days down the road, 5 days down the road. Did it work? Yes, if it worked, move on to the next priority. What's our next strategic action? What are we doing? And if you start, once you start getting good at it, you can work in 2 or 3 options, or you start looking out 10 or 14 days instead of 5 or 10 days. And it's just a process that includes agency administrators, FMOs, team members, and any other stakeholders that are involved to make sure that when a team comes in, they can be successful. And between team and agency administrator, they have a good understanding of what the priorities are and what the values at risk are. Right? So we can do that through WFDSS. We can do that through the RMA dashboard. There's some different things in this guide, and these are things that I've put together as a SOPL, as a plans chief or whatever, that have helped my team through the ISAP process. Here's another one. This is something that if you guys can sit down and do this as part of your WFDSS decision, it's going to make everything much easier. And what we've done here is, I went into this fire, we had, what are these, total of 20 different values at risk. And we started grouping them up and saying, okay, what are your priorities? These are your highest priority. These are your secondary priority. These are your tertiary priority, right? And that really helps to kind of focus what is that discussion. Because as a plans chief, I need it because I'm putting together my incident objectives for the IAP. But as a strategic operational planner, if I'm wearing that hat, I need that because then I can sit down with my ops chief and I can say, okay, here's our values that we need to protect. Here's the priority coming from the agency administrators. Put them on a map. Let's start coming up with them. Get your division soups around the table and let's start coming up with a plan for how we can start protecting these operational, these values of risk, knowing that these are the priority. And then, so the value at risk, the severity that it's going to impact that, that can be determined through FS Pro modeling. If we do FS Pro modeling, part of that FS Pro modeling is basic fire behavior runs. So you can, on a map, you can check it out where it falls within your FS Pro band. If it falls anywhere above that 50% band, meaning there's a greater than 50% chance the fire may impact it, then you can go back into basic fire behavior and you can say that within that pixel, behave says that we're going to have 12-foot flame lengths, So if you know that you have 12-foot flame lengths, that gives you a pretty good idea of what that value, what that impact to that value is going to be, whether that's an infrastructure value or a natural resource value. And you can determine both of those through that FS Pro run, severity and probability. You can determine that through that FS Pro run. So that's why I'm saying reach out and put in that request for risk. As soon as you need a decision, if you can get those analysts working on that stuff right off the bat, by the time you get to actually doing the decision, you'll have a usable product that you can actually use to help craft your WFDSS decision.
That's the biggest pitfall we're seeing with the team with this is these aren't being identified for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
We're in there implementing a strategy before we even have these discussions and really prioritizing what the values are up on the landscape. So, and you can see on this, Dylan has 20 line items or 25 line items on there. It's lumping them so that we can really pull those to the strategic side of it and start developing strategies based on the way those are lumped. But that's really going to help our ops chief so we can be on the same page and we're not wasting resources, efforts out there when we're going to go change the strategy 3 days later. We haven't talked about that. The other thing that's going on is, ISAP is a tool. There's different ways to have that alignment conversation. So you'll probably see some differences between teams on how those are being implemented. Most of the teams are going back to not having an ISAP meeting anymore. It's a strategic strat meeting is what's going to happen. And then they're using however they're getting to those conversations. So you guys can drive that a little bit on what you want that to look like. The other thing that we've gone to is instead of every 3 days having to have this conversation and our ops folks having to wait on that, is you guys are going to see that up front. We're bringing in back in the PACE model, the primary alternate contingency and emergency lines, and having those conversations within that. So that way, when we have to fall back, we're not having to group up to talk about that strategy change. It's already been talked about and our ops folks can just go over it.
And that's important too. I mean, that PACE planning is something we've all done for years. And I love the fact that we're kind of getting back into that because that's what we all understand, right? And especially when you can combine that with like the potential control location analytics that are coming out of the RMA dashboard. As a SOPL, yeah, that's the first thing I'm looking at is that PCL because I can spend 2 or 3 shifts on fire just trying to figure out what the lines are, or I could spend an hour looking at those analytics and narrowing down my options to what I really want to focus on when I go out in the field and either fly it or drive it. And that really helps to focus down what you're looking at. So.
And just stay at that strategic level. That's the trap it is and falling it now as they're trying to get tactical and get really operational with what's going on, which is really muddying the water a little bit.
Yeah.
The other part of it is, just as we're identifying what those values are, is understanding that there's going to be trade-offs with resource values. You're going to do some damage there from suppression activities and which ones you're not gonna always win with everything 100%. That's been a challenge super long or some of that stuff is we're gonna have some trade-offs and it's just which one's the lesser of the two evils.
With that, I remember taking the Silver King over fire from you guys and obviously the bigger priorities, but when we got the ISAP back, he had, I think, like a page and a half of CVARs. And when we took it, we were able to get further down the list.
Yeah.
So,
That changes the environment.
yep, exactly. So it was getting you guys captured. That was my first experience with ISAP, was taking over from you guys.
Yep.
It's captured.
So Tyler talked about the time frame. I'm gonna go back to that presentation I gave earlier, just because this graphic right here, that's what this is talking about. So I know it's hard to read back there, but this is during transition. This is operational periods 1 to 2, operational periods 3 to 4. And like Tyler was talking about, to set a team up, you have to have all this information ready for them on day one. You know, if you can have your WFDSS decision done, your critical values at risk identified, and make them part of a good quality in briefing, that sets that team up for success, where they're not spending the first 2 days trying to get that information from you, and then finally getting their feet under them on day 3, 4, and 5, which is historically kind of what we've been seeing over the last couple of years. If you do the work to get this ISAP thing identified and get those critical values at risk identified, and at least identify how much time you have before they're impacted and what is the severity of a fire impacting them truly going to be. I mean, and that's the thing, right? We can't just say, we know that not everything is impacted by fire in a negative way. Some things receive a positive benefit from fire, but we need to identify those. But all that needs to happen because, yeah, if you're waiting until day 3 or 4 to identify those values at risk, you've had a team in place for 4 days now. They've had resources in place for 4 days now that have just been spinning their wheels, trying to get their feet on the ground and get going, to where if we identify those resources right off the bat. And this is especially critically important when we get into PO5, because when we get into PO5, you don't know where these resources are coming from, right? And I'm not trying to place a negative connotation on resources coming in from out of area, because in PO5, we need resources coming in from all over the country. We need to do a better job of setting those resources up for success so that when they come into our area, they can be successful on day 1 or 2 or day 3. And by going through this process, we're going to make that a lot more successful. So it shouldn't matter whether you're getting Great Basin Team 1 or Eastern States Gold Team. You know, any one of those teams should be able to come in and hit the ground running if you've at least identified what those critical values at risk are, what those probabilities are, what those severities are, and have them identified on some kind of document, whether that's in a map or whether that's in the WFDSS decision or whatever it is. So that's all part of the process. And again, you got a lot of information in this guide. This guide here, kind of the other thing too is, this is always a key one whenever you're doing the ISAP process, is these are definitions. So it's important that everybody have the same definition of what catastrophic means, what critical means, what moderate means, what negligible means, and all those are defined in this matrix right here, whether you're talking about probability or severity. There's some other graphics in here too that I'd highly recommend that you look at, but that is really the rest of the guide. And then lastly, the other product that I put together that I know, you know, this may be getting a little outdated, but I want to bring this back to the discussion because this in briefing is part of that process as well. And part of the link tree that we set up is also this story map, which is a story map that is publicly accessible, lives on the internet, and can be used to in brief teams. Basically, it's set up right now for any district in Nevada to use. All you would have to do is publish a WFDSS decision and have your WFDSS decision ready to go. And the information that's in this story map is dynamic, and all these links are updated, ready for this fire season. And it basically follows the same format as what you see in the Red Book. But all that information is right here. So the reason I set this up is I know that every unit has their own processes that they like to put together too, as part of their preseason preparedness. This is a story map that you guys can use to in brief a team. That is one less thing your agency administrator or you guys have to do locally if you're preparing for a team. And if you've ever had to prepare for a team, even if you have 48 hours before an in briefing, those 48 hours are busy. You got stuff that you're doing. You got a million different things. And then on top of that, you've still got the fire activity that you're managing as well. So within this story map is links that you guys can use for an in briefing. I did want to highlight that down here at the bottom, just because I haven't updated this in a while, I've got a ton of links through here, including agency administrator information and support. But down here at the very bottom, I've got links to where if you guys, like for example, Southern Nevada District, I think I have you guys' website or, oh, I have your in briefing. You guys have your story map. So this is your story map. So I have that link going to there. But like some of the other districts, some people put all their information on a Google Drive. Some people put their information wherever you put your team in briefing information. If it can be linked, if you want it linked to this story map, just send me the link. I can put it on the story map, and then automatically you have all of your district's information ready to go off this story map. And the purpose of doing it on a story map is because if I am facilitating, like say you guys are busy, Tyler brings me down saying, hey, we're in briefing a team in 2 days. Can you help me prepare for the briefing? Everything that is on this story map, you just tell the team, set up a Teams meeting, go to the story map. They're looking at the same information. They're looking at the same weather reports. They're looking at the same climatology graphs. They can follow along, whether they're sitting in a room, sitting in their car, sitting on their phone, from wherever they can. And I've been briefed teams. I've been briefed teams for Ely this way. I've been briefed teams as a plans chief. I've done transitions. It is a different way to do it. I'm more than willing to help facilitate if there's any local needs at any point. But this is also a skill set that I know every district has. You just need the right tools to do it. And these are the tools to help make you successful and prepare you for bringing in teams. So I've always, in my fire management career, that's always been a big aspect of mine is, being able to bring teams in and help them be successful. When I started my career, I was duty officer during a pretty historic season, and I feel like we haven't done that much to help teams be successful in 20 years, to be honest. I mean, I remember in briefing teams in 2006 doing a better job than some of these in briefings I've gotten in 2024. And we have the technology to where we could be doing a lot better processes. And also by doing a remote in brief like this, you get the in brief out of the way. You can do the in brief whenever. The team could have just got their orders 2 hours ago and they're getting their in brief right away. They can still be moving to the fire. So it gets them the information even quicker to where they can start making phone calls and they're maybe a little bit more prepared so that when they do get on location, they can hit the ground running and actually focus on building an ICP, building an IAP, and supporting the fire on day one. So anyway, I wanted to bring this up because I think it's underutilized. Not by this district. I've seen other districts in Nevada bring teams in and not give them a good briefing. So in my point of view, it's my job to help set up these districts to where we're setting you up for success for IA, but that's the easy part. IA is the easy part. We need to be able to set the programs up to be able to come in for extended attack too. And that takes a little bit more planning. So let's do the work that needs to be set up to where a team can come in. They can come in from eastern states. They can come in from southern area. They could come in from Papua New Guinea if they're a recognized ICS team, and they would be able to hit the ground running and be successful in our organization. So that's kind of how I set that up. But this is there. You guys saw, I think you guys done a good job on your briefing as well. But I still just make this, available to anybody in the state because it is, it's not specific to any district. There's maps and everything here for everybody, and it's a tool that's available. But the reason why I think it's important is because once you get this in briefing out of the way, you start talking ISAP. That strategic alignment process gets a lot easier the better communication you have. So that's all I got. Are there questions?
Thank you, Demond. That was really good. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you guys' flexibility and not being real formal. And I like being able to sit down and have these discussions like this. Yeah, the other thing too, I was going to talk. We've also got templates. Where is that? Right here. And this is a DOI SharePoint, so I don't know. Yeah, I should be able to get in. Yeah. But we got templates in here for delegations. And some specific delegations, there's examples in here. The question did get brought up last week, and if you read the authorities table, you know, it does mention specifically that the Wildland Fire Service will sign the delegation of authority letter. And then all of the other bureaus will be co-signers on the leader's intent letter. So I think that's important to make sure, you know, I've been talking this for years, but we need to make sure that we have that. There needs to be a delegation of authority letter, and this is for complex, and I mean, I guess type 3 teams too. So this isn't just for your local ICs, whatever your local process is. I think we're still working that out, but I would definitely recommend having that standalone delegation of authority letter that would just be signed by the Wildland Fire Service signature authority. And then there's a leader's intent letter that lists everything that's not delegation of authority, right? We list all of our expectations. You will provide, you know, daily finance reports. All of that stuff lives in the leader's intent letter. The delegation of authority is just that. It's a delegation of authority. You are delegated the authority to act as incident commander on this fire starting this date at this time. Nothing more than that, just delegation of authority, no leader's intent information. So again, you know, that's Dylan Rader's opinion. But I've seen why you separate out those documents, and there is no standard form. There's no, you would think that in the government there would be a standard, an SF delegation form, right? There is a standard delegation form, but in fire service, there is no standard delegation. So there's examples in here, but leaders' intent letters are very important. You know, I think Tyler from the IC perspective could tell you every reason why that leader's intent letter is important, because at least, you know, from my perspective, you make each of your sections go through that, and they highlight all the things that they're going to have to be responsible for. And then on day 0, they know what they need to be doing. So it's not like, you know, I have worked with ICs that on day 13, they say, oh yeah, have you been doing this? Our leader's intent letter said we're supposed to be doing this. Like, no, we haven't, because you didn't say anything on day 1. We would have, if you would have told us on day 1, but that's why you share those, and you share that information out with your team, and you highlight, you know, I call it reaffirmation of the delegation, just to give it a fancy term, but every day we go through a CNG meeting and we reaffirm what we're doing to meet the delegation authority. And that's the agenda topic. That's what we need to know. So there are different ways you can accomplish it, but I would definitely recommend separating out that delegation authority and leader's intent letter. And all of those within that SharePoint site. And that's the only reason I'm looking at that screen right now. But at the bottom of that story map, all of these are links. So in addition to the link tree, those are all agency administrator links that I've set up over the years to either help out agency administrators through this process or part of my M581 teaching or whatever. So that's all in there. But if there's no other questions, that's the end of the training that I was prepared to do for you guys. So I appreciate you guys sitting through the whole day, and for the folks that are online, I appreciate you guys sticking with us too. I don't know how many more are still online, but hopefully this is beneficial. I have been recording it, so once I get some time to sit down, I'll look at maybe doing some processing, and I'll make this available, whether it's on YouTube or FireNet, but it'll be available to anybody that missed it. And they'll be able to sit through the YouTube video and fast forward and go through it as needed. So there is, on the link tree that I did send out, there is one more link down here on the WFDSS training. You don't have to do this today, but I do have a survey that if you guys can click on this WFDSS training survey, if you can complete that at any point here in the next few days, you know, it just helps me to kind of identify, maybe if I do this next year, it's going to help me to identify what I need to focus on, if there's some additional topics you guys want to see covered, but it also just gives me some feedback too. So helps me make this a little better for the next time. So I appreciate the time. Thank you, Southern Nevada. You've been a great host, and looking forward to going to a hockey game tonight. Yeah. Go Knights. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you.